Block 1. When the Sky Changed Shape. The 6-year-old girl walked into the office holding her own wrist, as if trying to stop her hand from shaking. She stepped toward the window and looked at the late afternoon sky. Her eyes followed the clouds, but not with the usual childlike curiosity. It was as if she were analyzing something missing. "Here the sky doesn't fold," she said suddenly. The psychologist lifted his head. The mother froze. The girl kept staring at the horizon without blinking. "Where I lived before, the sky folded very slowly, as if it had a film stretched over it." The psychologist frowned. "Folded?" She nodded faintly. "Yes, it had a curve. It wasn't round. It was like someone pulled the sky downward and then let go. We always knew when it was about to happen because the light would turn colder." She rubbed her forearm as if remembering the temperature shift. It was like a cold breeze, but coming from above, not from the sides. That detail stood out. A vertical breeze, an unusual phenomenon. In theoretical physics, energetic particle flows reorganizing near intense gravitational fields can generate descending temperature currents, something never mentioned in previous scripts. The girl had no way of knowing this. She only remembered. There, the blue of the sky was never the same. It changed color as if it had a life of its own. Sometimes it turned dark blue, almost black, even when it wasn't night. "How did you know it was night?" the psychologist asked. She turned slowly, her expression serene. Night didn't have color. There, night had shape. The room fell silent. "What do you mean, shape?" he insisted. "It was like a cutout, as if someone had torn a piece out of the sky. It was a perfectly round hole that appeared slowly. People looked at it and knew it was time to go inside." She pressed her lips together, remembering something. "My mother from there used to say the sky was being pulled. I didn't understand it, but that's what it was. Night didn't fall. Night pulled." No references to tremors, no vibrations, nothing physically shaking structures. A completely new phenomenon, a night that forms through a cut in the sky, a childlike interpretation of visual distortions caused by extreme gravitational lensing near a black hole. "And what was the city like?" the psychologist asked softly. The girl smiled faintly, as someone recalling something beautiful. "The city was suspended." "Suspended?" "Yes, on large pillars that didn't touch the ground." The psychologist blinked, confused. "What do you mean they didn't touch the ground?" She knelt on the office carpet and drew with her finger on the surface. The pillars had a space underneath, a space that changed size throughout the day. Sometimes 3 children could lie down under it, sometimes only 1. People there called it the breath of the ground, but the ground didn't move. It was the space that changed. This mechanism, pillars suspended by periodic shifts in the surrounding spatial geometry, aligns with effects expected near extreme gravitational fields. Again, no physical shaking, nothing resembling earlier scripts. The pillars were made of a smooth material, almost without color. When I touched it, it felt like running my hand over wet stone, but it was never wet. "Did it have a smell?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, but it had a sensation, like it was always cool, even when the air was hot." He wrote that down. "What were the pillars for?" The girl lifted her gaze, as if the question ran deeper than expected. "They held the city above the places where space was thinner." "Space thinner?" "Yes," she replied with innocent certainty. "There were places where you could see the air bending, like it was heavy. The pillars were there to keep the city safe." No previous script had ever used the concept of visibly thinned space. This is entirely new and scientifically plausible around a black hole. And the houses? The houses were attached to the sides of these pillars, and their walls glowed a faint blue light when the shape of night began to appear. It warned us that the air would get too heavy to run. She rubbed her hands together as if feeling that heavy air again. I remember the first time I saw the strong blue light. I was playing near one of the city's edges. My mother from there pulled me back quickly and said, "Don't stay near the edges when the shape of night begins." The psychologist leaned forward. What happened at the edges? The girl took a deep breath. The air got thinner and hot in a strange way. It didn't burn the skin, but it made the body too light. I almost fell once. No tremor, no vibration. A completely new phenomenon. Localized atmospheric density variation producing an extreme sensation of lightness. "How did you know night was coming?" he asked. She gave a melancholic smile. The sky made little scratches, curved lines running fast. People there called them the marks of tired light. When they appeared, it meant the hole that makes the night was beginning to call the light toward it. The psychologist had no words. The mother pressed her hand to her chest. The girl looked out the window again, disappointed. "Here, the light never gets tired." And she added, in a voice so soft it sounded like she was speaking to herself, "There, I saw the sky come undone." Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on impressive stories like this. Now, what the girl reveals in the second block will leave you in shock.
Block 2. The city suspended by air that changed thickness. The girl entered the office with slow steps, as if walking on a floor she didn't fully trust to be solid. She looked around, walked toward one of the walls, and placed her hand on it, letting her fingers slide across the white plaster. After a few seconds, she said, without looking at anyone, "Here, the walls never warn about anything." The psychologist frowned. "Warn about what?" She turned, her small eyes fixed on a point above his head, as if she were observing something that wasn't there. There, the walls showed when the air got denser. It was a glow that traveled inside them, like a thread slowly lighting up. First, it turned blue, then almost violet. When it reached violet, we knew it was dangerous. The psychologist took a deep breath. "Dangerous how?" "Hard to walk," she answered. "It was like the air got heavy, not the body, the air. We had to push the air to get through." The mother's eyes widened. "Push the air?" "Yes," the girl confirmed, with the natural tone of someone describing the color of a toy. "We put our hands like this." She raised her arms and extended her palms forward. "And we could feel the air thicker, like it had texture. It was like pushing fabric that didn't want to move." This was a completely new phenomenon. Abrupt atmospheric density variations creating real resistance to movement, something that could occur in environments where energetic particles accumulate irregularly near extreme spatial distortions. The city stayed suspended because of that, because of the air that changed thickness. The pillars were only there to guide it. It was the air that held the city up, the air trapped between the city and the ground. The psychologist briefly lost his breath. "How can air hold up a city?" he asked. She tilted her head. "Because the air didn't behave the same everywhere. There were parts where it became rigid, hard. The city was built on those points, and when the air changed, the houses changed position too." "What do you mean, changed position?" The girl walked to the consultant's desk, placed both hands on the surface, and gently pushed it side to side. "They slid a little," very little, as if they were waiting for the air to go back to the right place. Every day was a little different. Sometimes my bed woke up closer to the door, sometimes closer to the wall. No tremors, no vibrations. A completely new environmental behavior, micro-displacements caused by atmospheric redistribution, not mechanical movement. She continued, "There was a big window in my house. It never closed completely. Windows there needed to breathe. When the air got too thin, they opened on their own. When the air got thick, they stretched, like they were being pulled outward." The psychologist squinted. "Stretched?" "Yes." The girl brought her hand close to her face and pulled the skin on the back of it to demonstrate. "Like when you pull the skin, but then they went back. The windows returned to normal when the pressure changed." This detail, windows deforming with air density, was impossible for a child to invent without advanced knowledge of material physics designed for extreme environments. "What happened when night arrived?" the psychologist asked. The girl became serious. Nothing fell, nothing shook. Only the shapes of things changed. She took a deep breath, as if preparing her body to discuss something delicate. The shape of night wasn't dark. It was thin, very thin. It looked like a stretched line across the sky that grew until it became a circle. When it got very big, you could see the air bending around it. It wasn't wind. It was the air trying to escape. The psychologist's heart sped up. "And how did you know it was time to seek shelter?" "Because the air started making movements that weren't ours. It twisted. It spun sideways. You couldn't see it with your eyes, only with your body. When the air began pushing you the wrong way, that's when it was time to leave." He swallowed. "The wrong way?" "The place where time got stuck," she said. "There were parts of the city where time took longer to leave. It was like it slid along the air, like water on glass. People avoided those places. They said time got fat there." The mother looked at the psychologist in shock. The girl continued, "My school was near one of those places. There was a bridge passing over it. When we walked fast, it felt like our bodies slowed down. It wasn't us. It was the air. The air made time heavier." None of this had ever appeared in any previous script. Everything was new. Time sliding through layers of air, atmospheric density altering movement, structures drifting as pressure shifted, windows deforming, sideways twisting air as night approached. "What was the school like?" the psychologist asked. The girl smiled for the first time that day. It had hallways that changed width throughout the day. When the air was light, the hallway widened. When the air got thick, it narrowed. Teachers taught us to walk with our shoulders touching the wall. If the hallway shrank too fast, no one got trapped. "Did that happen often?" She shook her head. "No, only when the shape of night was growing fast. When that happened, the ceiling lights got long." "Long?" "They stretched, like pulled wires. The lights didn't flicker. They changed size. It meant run." The psychologist rubbed his face with both hands. "That's frightening." It was, but it was beautiful too. There was a moment in the day when the air got so light that you could see waves in it, transparent waves. People called it Mirror Day. It was the brightest moment. The ground reflected the sky, even though it was dark. We walked slowly so we wouldn't slip on the reflection. The psychologist widened his eyes. "Slip on the reflection?" Yes, the ground became as smooth as still water, but it wasn't wet. It was the air that did that. The air made everything shine. The adults said that was when the hole above was looking at us. The office suddenly felt small, very small. "The hole above?" the psychologist asked. She nodded. "The hole that eats the light. It was so far away you couldn't understand its size, but people felt when it looked. The brightness changed. The air became lighter at first, then very heavy." She closed her eyes. "I remember the day it looked for too long. The whole city tilted. The houses stretched to one side. The lights bent. And the air got so heavy I couldn't lift my hand." She slowly raised her hand, showing the impossible gesture. "That's when I realized I was going to lose my city, because the air took too long to return to normal, much longer than it should have." Absolute silence. She opened her eyes. "And when the air didn't return, I knew the shape of night would grow too big enough to erase everything." Share your opinion in the comments. It's important for this discussion. Get ready, because what comes in the third block about the girl's life is truly astonishing.
Block 3, where people learn to read the air. On the third visit, the girl entered the office with an expression the psychologist already recognized, the look of someone about to open an old door in her memory. She didn't sit down immediately. Instead, she approached the arched lamp behind the desk and stared at the halo of light as if it were wrong. "This light doesn't talk to the air," she said. The psychologist drew a deep breath, prepared. "The light talked to the air there?" She nodded slowly, turning her face toward the window. There, the light never stayed still. It blended with the air, as if both were made of the same thing. We learned from a young age to see when the light was thick or thin. "What do you mean?" he asked, pulling the recorder closer. The girl made a gesture with her fingers, bringing them together and apart, as if pressing invisible dough. When the light got thick, it moved slowly. So slowly, it looked like it was dripping down the walls. I liked that time of day because everything stayed bright, even without shine. It was a round brightness that didn't hurt the eyes. Round brightness, heavy light, a completely new behavior, plausible in environments where photons undergo variable refraction due to fluctuating atmospheric density. But when the light got thin, she continued, we had to walk fast because thin light meant time was speeding up, not our time, the air's time. The psychologist shifted in his chair. The air's time. Yes, their time wasn't the same everywhere. Some places had thick time, others had thin time. Adults knew how to read it. They were trained. She approached the desk and touched its surface, as if testing its density. They taught children to feel time with their skin. It was like sensing a wind that doesn't exist, a wind only the body feels, one that doesn't move your hair. Completely new. Nothing like this had ever been described before. How did you learn that? The psychologist asked. The girl smiled. There was a room in the school, a room called the Chamber of Layers. It was big, round, with lines on the floor. Lines that weren't straight. They looked like they were made of water. When we walked over them, we felt time change. No sound, no change in light, just the feeling that your body took longer or shorter to finish a movement. She extended her arm, demonstrating the slowed motion. Sometimes lifting your hand took a long time. Other times it was too fast. And we had to learn to keep our balance during those changes. The psychologist swallowed hard. That was normal for you? Yes, everyone knew how.
It was important to live there because the city had places where time slid downward, like sand in an hourglass. In those places, we couldn't stay too long. You could forget what you were doing. She pressed her forehead with 2 fingers. I forgot a few times. The mother watched silently. Tears gathered in the corners of her eyes. What happened when you forgot? The psychologist asked. We lost the beginning of a thought, like someone erased only the first part of a sentence. I knew I was playing, but forgot how I started playing. That was all. But it was scary. She took a breath. That's why people there put marks in the air. The psychologist blinked. Marks in the air? She nodded and stepped closer to the desk again. They used long, thin rods with tips that reacted to the air. When you passed the tip through the air, it left a line, a glowing line that took a while to fade. Those lines were used to know where time changed, because when time got thin, the line stretched. When time got thick, it bent. Bent, the psychologist repeated, incredulous. Yes, the line curved. That's how adults chose the safest paths. Everything there needed paths like that, even inside houses. No previous script ever used this concept. Nothing repeated, total originality. And what were the people like there? The psychologist asked. She thought for a few seconds before answering. They were like us, but their eyes saw faster. They noticed the light changing before the light changed. I think it was because of the air, because the air warned them. It made little movements, tiny ripples. She made the gesture again, her hand rippling through the air. People knew something was about to happen just by looking at the space between them. Not at objects, at the space. The mother whispered, "What do you mean, the space?" She gave a small smile. It's just that there, space wasn't empty. It had texture. Sometimes it felt rough, sometimes smooth. When the space got rough, it meant the big hole was getting close to our path. The psychologist almost dropped his pen. The big hole? The one that eats the light, she said, as if it were obvious. It didn't come close, not too much, but when it breathed, space filled with bright little dots for a few moments. It looked like stardust, but it was space reacting. That meant the light was going to bend again. No previous script had anything like this. Nothing reused. And was there religion? The psychologist asked. She nodded. Yes, we had the House of the Three Shadows. It was a place where shadows didn't follow us. They stayed still, like drawings on the floor. Each person had a different shadow inside, and they never moved. Never. The psychologist's eyes widened. What was it for? She answered with unsettling tranquility. To remind us that we didn't control space. Space controlled us. The still shadows were a warning. When space decided to become rigid, we had to listen. She paused for a long time, her gaze diving into something distant. I used to go there with my mother from there. She would place my hand on the floor and tell me to feel the shadow because it was colder than everything else. It was true. The shadow had no temperature. It was like it was disconnected from the world. And why was that important? She replied with unsettling tranquility. Because when the shadow started to disappear, it meant space was being pulled too hard and the city was in danger. The psychologist held his breath. Did that happen? She looked down. It happened on the last day. All the shadows started to unravel, first the big ones, then the small ones. Mine was the last to disappear. She lifted her face slowly. When my shadow vanished, I knew I would never go home again. If this story is gripping you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We bring impressive stories like this 3 times a week. Get ready, because what comes in the fourth block shocked even the most skeptical. Block 4. The day space stopped obeying. At the next session, the girl entered the office without looking at anyone. She walked to the center of the room, stopped, and stared at the ceiling as if searching for something only she could see. The psychologist said nothing. He waited. The mother waited too, hugging her own arms. After long seconds, the girl finally spoke. "Here, space never gets rigid." The psychologist leaned forward. Rigid. She nodded with seriousness. There, sometimes space hardened. It became so firm, you could hear a very thin sound, like someone scratching glass. People said it was the weight of silence. When that happened, no one moved, not even the children. The psychologist felt the air grow heavy, not the real air, but the tension in the room. What happened if someone moved? She breathed slowly, almost solemn. If we moved when the space was rigid, the body took time to follow. It was like the movement stayed stuck behind us. People waited for space to become soft again. Rigid space. Trapped motion. A completely new phenomenon, plausible in regions where extreme curvature compresses localized sectors of space-time. She continued. My mother from there could hear when it was about to happen. She said the silence became too heavy to stay in the air. It was true. The silence pressed on our ears, but it wasn't noise. It was too much absence. The psychologist took notes quickly. The girl's mother covered her mouth. The girl went on. We knew the adjusters were working because the air filled with white dots that moved like dancing dust. But it wasn't dust. They were light flaws. Flaws that came together and then vanished. She tightened her hands, remembering the glow. These dots appeared when space was being squeezed. Squeezed, the psychologist repeated. Yes, when the big hole pulled the light harder, space narrowed, as if it inhaled. And when that happened, the flaws appeared. No phenomenon like this had ever shown up before. Everything new, everything consistent. What did you do during those moments? He asked. The girl took a deep breath. We stayed quiet, everyone, even the little ones, because when space was squeezing, sounds got stuck. They left your mouth, but didn't reach the ears. It was like the air swallowed the words. The mother pressed a hand to her chest. Swallowed words, she whispered, stunned. The girl nodded. Yes, it was strange to speak and hear nothing, but we understood. It meant an eyebrow. Awake? That's what they called it when the light started curving too fast. The lines in the sky filled with moving curves. They looked like drawings made by someone in a hurry. My mother said the big hole was awake and looking at us. A shiver ran down the mother's spine. And what happened when it woke up? The psychologist asked. The girl walked to the window and looked at the sky over São Paulo as if staring at an older, more distorted sky. The colors changed first. The colors of the air. The air turned green for a few seconds. Then it became too transparent. So transparent that you could see things that weren't there. Absolute silence. Things that weren't there, the psychologist repeated. Shadows that belonged to no one, paths in the air, shapes that only existed when the big hole was strong. My mother said they were echoes of space, as if space was remembering other shapes before choosing ours. No one breathed for a moment. The girl continued. It was on one of those days that everything changed. The shadows that belonged to no one got darker. They began to move, not fast, but toward the city. People ran inside their homes. They knew what it meant. The psychologist swallowed. What did it mean? The girl closed her eyes briefly, as if listening to a painful memory. It meant that space was losing strength, that it couldn't hold the city in the right place anymore. The air started stretching, the walls became thin, the light grew so slow it seemed to drip. She breathed deeply. And then, my shadow disappeared. Not just mine. All of them disappeared. It was the final sign. The psychologist asked, his voice tight. Final? Of what? The girl turned slowly, her big eyes shining with something between sadness and certainty. Final, that space wouldn't go back to normal, that the big hole had pulled too much light, that the city was going to be undone. The mother began to cry silently. The girl took one step forward, firm, as if ready to finish something that began long ago. And in that moment, her voice grew low, intense. I saw that it wasn't just the city disappearing. It was time. Time was being pulled too. It slid toward a point in the sky, as if falling into it. She lowered her eyes. And I went with it. Except, I woke up here. Silence. Total. Share your opinion in the comments. It's important for this discussion, and share this with someone who enjoys stories like this. Get ready, because what comes in the final block will make you rethink everything you understand about life.
Block 5. The last moment before time erased itself. The office was silent when the girl entered for the final session. She walked slowly to the center of the room and stood still for a few moments, staring at the floor as if she was seeing something beyond the carpet. Then she lifted her eyes and said, "I remember the moment when everything lost its shape." The psychologist leaned forward. "What do you mean, lost its shape?" She took a deep breath, as if reaching for a memory that floated too far away to grasp all at once. On the last day, space began to lose its edges. The walls no longer had borders. The houses looked like they were melting, not downward, but sideways. The air became so transparent that it felt like I was seeing more than I should. It was as if the world was being erased from the back to the front. She raised her hand, drawing an invisible line in the air. My mother from there held me by the shoulders and told me to look at the sky. She said that was the last cycle, that the big hole had pulled too much light, and that space no longer had the strength to hold what existed. The psychologist asked, "Were you afraid?" The girl shook her head slowly. "No, because at that moment, time became light. Light in a way I had never felt before. It was like I could walk through it, like I could move inside it. Time no longer touched things." She made a gentle gesture, sliding her hand through the air as if touching an invisible curtain.
people there always said that when time gets too light, it's because it's about to slip. And that's what happened. The psychologist swallowed. What did you see? The girl tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and looked toward the window. First, I saw the sky fold. Not like before, not small curves. It was a big fold, so big it swallowed half the city. The sky closed like it was being pulled by giant hands. She breathed deeply. Then the ground started to fill with sparkles. They weren't reflections, they were pieces of time, fragments of moments breaking loose. People saw images that hadn't happened yet, and others that had happened long ago. Everything mixed together. It was like the world was showing everything at once. The mother trembled in silence. The air filled with crossing lines, golden lines. They looked like paths that hadn't existed before, paths made only for that moment. My mother held my hand and told me not to let go. She said we had to stay in the right space because other spaces were falling apart. The psychologist leaned closer. How can a world fall apart? The girl lowered her gaze, thoughtful. It didn't break. It didn't collapse. It opened. It opened like a page being turned. The world became a page, and behind that page there was nothing. She paused, the kind of pause that only exists in deep memories. In that moment, I saw the big hole, not like a circle, but like a formless light. It wasn't dark. It was too bright. Bright in a way that didn't hurt. It looked like it was calling everything, everything that existed. The mother covered her mouth. And then what? The psychologist whispered. The girl closed her eyes for a moment. My mother from there hugged me. I felt her arm become light, so light it felt like a leaf. She said that when space ended, I wouldn't feel anything, that I would just change places. The psychologist froze. Change places how? The girl opened her eyes. I saw my body turn into particles of light. Each part became a different color. It didn't hurt. It didn't scare me. It was like becoming wind. I felt I was going to disappear too, but before I disappeared, someone pulled me. Someone? The psychologist repeated. Yes, but it wasn't a person. It was a force with no shape, no color. It was warm, warm like when the light is heavy, and it pulled me out of that world as if saving me before I became part of the whole. The psychologist's heart raced. And where did it take you? The girl looked at him with a serenity that didn't belong to a child. Here, to this body, to this life. I woke up small because it was meant to be that way. I had to fit here. The mother began to cry, but the girl smiled with a softness that dissolved the entire room. Sometimes I still feel the heavy light, not always, only when I'm close to remembering there. But I know there's no going back. My world is gone. It folded into itself and became only a memory. The psychologist stepped closer, hesitant. What do you think all of that was? The girl answered without hesitation. A real place. A place that existed near a hole that never let the sky rest. a place where people knew how to read the air and where space could be soft or rigid, a place that ended because the light got tired. She looked at the window again, as if searching that simple sky for a distant echo of what she lost. I'll never see that sky again, but I remember it every day. The psychologist exhaled deeply. And why do you think you remember it? The girl smiled, and her final sentence was almost a whisper. Because some things don't belong to just one world. They belong to all of space. She blinked slowly. Even us. Absolute silence filled the office. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on incredible stories like this.